right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us again. Fire for Effect. We're here now on episode 6, I believe. I'm Marcus Moyer. Got Jim McBride here and John Jones. We're missing a couple of our regulars. Pastor Mike Pedlow couldn't join us today. And our attorney extraordinaire, who has yet to join us, is in court this morning. And so he is not able to join us either. But we'll have a great discussion here, I think, with the three of us. We've got an interesting topic lined up today. So over to you, gentlemen. Anything to say before we get kicked off?
Yeah, I just want to give credit to John. So episode 5 is the first time we played some original music from John Jones himself. All the music you heard on that one was original from John. I had one song he wrote for the opening, one song in the middle for a transition kind of thing, and then at the end, a different song. So very cool, very honored to have some original music from the man himself. And this will be the second episode that music will be put in the podcast. So thanks, John, for writing those tunes.
Yeah, I think my secretary put a bill in the mail for your address, Jim. So just square that up when you're ready. I kid. That was a good experience for me to sit down and try to just kind of consider what all we're going to get into in our discussions and try to find a piece of music, I guess, somewhere in my mindset or in my heart that would be, I guess, appropriate for what we're going to get into. You guys seem to like that one, and you all mentioned that it had kind of a gunfighter feel to it. So for Fire for Effect, I think we're all on the same track here, apparently.
Well, if we can ever convince Rich Turner to join us,
oh yeah,
I think he'll appreciate that as well. That's kind of his style anyway. And when we were in Afghanistan, I was a pilot with the B-22 squadron, and Rich was a forward air controller working down south in the Helmand province. And I knew he was there, but I didn't really know what he was doing or what he was up to. But as I was out flying one day on a mission, and I checked in on the radio with the battalion air officer, and I heard a voice that I thought I recognized, and it was Rich. And I believe the call sign for the unit he was with was Gunslinger.
That sounds appropriate.
So I think, well, I don't know what happened to Jim. We lost him. I think he was having some technical difficulties. I think he's trying to dial back in.
Yeah, I think last time I was on, Skynet was trying to sabotage my end of things, and I guess maybe AI is drawing a bead on Jim this morning. I must have known he was going to say something good.
Yeah, I think we have definitely irritated. We've invoked the ire of the AI gods. I think they're messing with us. There he is. He's back. We got you, Jim?
Yep. There we go.
All right. Well, to start this morning, I wanted to correct the record from a previous episode, or I should say, just clarify the record. So toward the end of episode 4, I think it was just Jim and I at the moment, because I think John AI had erased you from the podcast at that point. But Jim and I were discussing this CH-46 mishap that occurred some time ago that prompted the Marine Corps to change its training protocols. And we had gotten into this discussion because we were talking about how people seem lost today, unable to figure a way out of the chaos and a way to navigate life with all of the noise and everything that really just suffocates people. We were talking about the importance of having something that doesn't change, that you can grab onto, that'll help guide you out of those chaotic situations. And it brought to my mind the underwater egress training that we do in the Marine Corps, where they put you in a helicopter hulk. They'll dunk you to the bottom of a pool, flip you upside down while you're blindfolded, and you have to get out of the aircraft. And the way they teach you to do that is to grab onto a reference point, something in the aircraft that doesn't move, regardless of the orientation, upside down, sideways, light, dark, doesn't matter. this object that you choose to grab onto is something that's stationary, that doesn't move, and with your hand on that, you now have a reference point, and you can feel your way out of the aircraft, even if you can't see. And so we brought up a video of that mishap that brought that training about, and I believe we obviously didn't prepare or plan to talk about that, so I didn't come prepared with the details, and I may have misspoke on some of those particulars, and I wanted to correct that. So the incident in question happened actually back on December 9th of 1999, so quite a bit longer ago than I initially thought. It occurred about 14 miles off the coast of Point Loma in California. The aircraft and the Marines that were involved were from Naval Air Station Miramar, and they were part of the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit. They were on workups at the time. The helicopter was a CH-46 Sea Knight that was assigned to Marine Medium Helicopter Squadron 166, and they were in the process of ferrying troops back and forth between an LHD, the USS Bonhomme Richard, and an underway replenishment oiler vessel called the USNS Pecos. And I think I originally had said that the aircraft crashed while it was attempting to land on the LHD. That was not correct. It was actually on approach to the Pecos when that happened. There were 18 Marines on board. 11 of them were rescued, and 7 were lost at sea.
Wow.
So I had a few of those particulars wrong. Just wanted to correct that here for any viewer who may be interested.
A lot more Marines than I expected. I think.
Yeah.
When I was a crew chief on the 46, I don't think it could carry 18 Marines, or maybe both the engine capacity at the time as it was getting older, and the regulations probably to prevent losing too many Marines at one time in case it went down.
Yeah. And I had originally thought that everybody died in that accident, but apparently the majority, about 2/3 of them, were rescued, but we did lose 7 Marines in that incident. So anyway, I just wanted to keep the record as accurate as possible, and I knew I had gotten some of those details wrong.
It's all good. It was brought up on the fly, so totally understandable.
Not to make light of any of that, but you're not going to make me correct my mistakes now moving forward, right? Because I know I'm going to use some stuff that has no bearing in facts whatsoever.
Oh, no, but I figure anybody that happens to watch that episode, if they know anything about marine aviation, they're probably familiar with that mishap. And if they listen to my first attempt at explaining it, they're like, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. That's not what happened. That's not where it was.
Yeah. I think the audience may make that decision for all of us every episode. These guys don't know what they're talking about.
Well, that's why we're here. We're all trying to figure it out together.
That's right.
That's right. That's right. And I don't want to tell people what to think. We just want to encourage each other to think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
100%. Well, I imagine the topic for today, it's a controversial topic, and I think I'm starting to see it, or at least I think I do. It seems to be more prevalent on social media and even in legacy media. And it could be that it is more prevalent, but it could also very well be that I'm just paying more attention now. It's kind of like when you buy a new car, you may have never seen one like that on the road before, but as soon as you start driving it, you see them everywhere. So the thing that got me thinking about this topic was a message that I heard preached by a pastor named Noel George out in Cabot, Arkansas. My sister attends his church out there, Brockington Road Church of the Nazarene in Cabot, Arkansas. And the title of his message was Redeeming the Patriarchy. So a provocative title, to be sure, but it was a great message. You can actually find it on YouTube if you're interested. The name of the message, I think, is actually Strong Father, Strong Homes, I think was the name of the title.
It seems familiar. I might have come across that before.
It was preached earlier this month. But that really got me thinking about this topic in particular. And in recent weeks, I've, as I said, started to note a lot more material on the subject. I've seen several articles in Politico and The Guardian. I've seen references to studies by the Institute of Family Studies as well as the National Longitudinal Study for Adolescent Health. And not to mention multiple podcasts, probably the most prolific podcaster on and interviewer on this topic is Jordan Peterson. But anyway, there seems to be a real or perceived phenomenon that's occurred in the last century, we'll say, of a cultural and a societal shift that has marginalized the role of men with a very stiff condemnation of what has been termed toxic masculinity, and at the same time extolling the merits of feminism. And that's the perception anyway. So what I would put to you gentlemen this morning for discussion is that the case? Have men been culturally and socially marginalized in recent years and decades? And if so, what have been the observable impacts of that? If that is the case, should the patriarchy, however we define that, should it be redeemed in some form? And is it even redeemable in the world we live in and this current environment?
Good stuff. You want to start, John?
Yeah, let you go. Yeah.
All right. So, yes, the patriarchy has been, men in general, the idea of men and masculinity has been increasingly ostracized in our society over the last several decades. And as you were saying this and defining patriarchy, and these terms, depending on how you look at them, are almost meant to be divisive. Really, to be honest with you, in my opinion, because like just for example, the Bible doesn't talk about a quote unquote patriarchy. It just talks about the roles of men and women in society and in family, and all these social justice warriors put these terms on it, and psychologists and sociologists put these terms on it, and I get it, the legitimate terms. But like, I think that, taking a quick segue, there's, in a sense, there's always some form of a patriarchy, and there's also some form of a matriarchy in society, in all societies, when you think about it, because men and women have roles in society and in family, and those roles are different depending on what part of the world you're in, even what part of the country you're in. But yes, in America and in the West in general, there's been clearly a very concerted effort of demeaning and undermining and criticizing and critiquing the quote unquote patriarchy, or the role of men in society. So that answers, I think, your first question. That's my definite opinion. I think most listeners would not quibble with that too much. I think it's probably more about, okay, why and what's the impacts, which we can get to later. But I want to give John a chance to chime in.
So I would, of course, I think we're mostly in our group that we fellowship here. We've got a lot of similar perspective on issues like this, and of course, I would have to agree uh, that the patriarchy has been somewhat, at least watered down at the very best, or at very least. And some people would probably say that's a good thing. That we're supposed to be, you know, uh, on equal footing with each other or what have you. And I know that we probably as Christians, we would probably disagree with that, because we see the design that God had in mind for a family unit, and we see the purpose behind it. It's kind of hard to imagine describing that to somebody who was not founded in Christianity. I always struggle with that. That seems to be an issue. So I think probably, if I had to have that discussion with somebody about this patriarchy issue, is it being threatened, and should it be restored or what have you? Um, I think this could be actually approached as this: anytime that the patriarchy is threatened, the role of a man is threatened. but so is the role of a woman, equally so. And anytime you do that, you're taking the identity of each individual person away from them a little bit. And this actually makes me think of a conversation Marcus and I had recently in private, that we were talking about how dialects in cultures are being watered down. And so everybody's starting to sound the same. And you could see this same thing happening if the role of a man and the role of a woman are all of a sudden watered down and everybody's doing the same thing. We're all losing our identity. And as a preacher I just recently heard say, there's a huge difference in unity and uniformity. And there seems to be this movement to make all humans uniform and the same, and nobody outranks one another, and certainly not having a man in charge of a woman. We're not going to have that at all. Um, and I don't know if that's accurate. I don't know how to base that on fact, but it's just kind of an undertone that I hear in a lot of conversations anymore, and it seemed to really start being presented a lot through arts and entertainment in the 90s. To me, I saw a lot of television shows where the husband slash father was always the goofy idiot, and the cute wife always had the solution. She was the brain through the outfit and whatnot. And we can ask the age old question: does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? And I think we're seeing the effects of that in society. So I'm not even really sure if I've answered a question at this point, but you just kind of opened the door there, and a lot of my thoughts came rushing through. So maybe there's some more topic for discussion we can get into there.
You mentioned something that I've heard mentioned a couple times before in other venues and contexts of how that shift, that subtle shift in how men are viewed, started back in the, I don't know, probably the 20s or 30s, definitely in the 40s and 50s, with the radio programs and television shows where the man is always this bumbling idiot, this buffoon, and that is definitely continued through all of the sitcoms, um, and the more popular card like The Simpsons, Family Guy. Every one of those, at its core, involves the main character, the father, who's an idiot.
Yep. Again
And then
and
you can
again.
see it even bleed over into television and radio commercials. Every problem that there is to be solved, there seems to be a man who's in a quandary of how to resolve it. And immediately the wife comes in with a suggestion of something that one of her friends or somebody else in her life has just called this number and all your problems will be solved. You know? So it's interesting. It definitely seems to be a thing. And as far, you mentioned that it's hard to have this conversation without a common framework to work around. As Christians, that framework is the Bible. But if you have this conversation with somebody who's not a Christian, um, where do you begin finding common ground? But even people who are not Christians realize that whatever this phenomenon is that has happened has is troubling and is having some societal ramifications. A recent article in The Guardian, I think this was back on August 4th. Jim, I think you shared this article with us, mentioned that the New York Times is interrogating the phenomena of quote unquote heteropessimism.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting term. Or even heterofatalism, where women specifically are viewing and lamenting their misfortune, a lifelong disappointment given to the flakiness and apparent commitment phobia of the men that they encounter, deploring the amount of man keeping, in other words, shouldering the structural burden of men's declining social networks in their lives.
Yeah.
So even non Christian women see a problem that is
Mm-hmm.
developed.
Yeah, it's interesting when a society harnesses its social forces to demean a particular gender and a masculinity and um, fatherhood. That, oh, what a shock that a few decades later, that subsector of society feels unmoored and kind of flailing, and you see it in other ways too. College percentage of college graduates are now overwhelmingly women, and we can get into the statistics just in general, but boys and men in several measures of society fallen way behind females now, in both education level and income level, and of course crime and drug use, all that stuff. And yet we continue as a society to continue to beat down males and men and masculinity. And I think the thing about masculinity is important because I think that's specifically the part of men and manhood that is critiqued and is toxic masculinity is a common word term now, and it's usually when I see it or when it's talked about, it's there's not a counter type of masculinity that's positive masculinity. It's just toxic masculinity is a thing, and we have to stamp it out, or we've got to get men to be more sensitive and everything. But by nature, men are masculine, more masculine than women, by and large, on average. So, is there a non-toxic masculinity in society? Like, first of all, we can critique, whether society's definition of what toxic masculinity is truly is toxic. But even if so, even given that, like, what's a positive masculinity? And of course, a lot of us know Jordan Peterson this is what he harps on all the time, that just imagine society without men, and our societies would crumble, because women do so many things in our society, men do so many things in our society, and they self segregate in the types of jobs and types of roles that they do. And he mentions, bricklayers and construction workers, things like that, overwhelmingly men. And anyway, I'll stop. But it's just basically, I think we have to define what part of masculinity, what part of men is it that society has turned against? Is that valid? And I think we could probably parse, yes, there's certain types of masculinity that are toxic, quote unquote toxic, but I think it's far less than what's been relegated as toxic in society. And then focusing on, what Marcus, you brought up, from the biblical, and John, from a biblical standpoint, from a Christian standpoint, we could talk about the value of men and women, but even not from a Christian standpoint, I think that men are getting a bad rap, and the role of masculinity in society is getting a bad rap. Although there are of course aspects of man and aspects of certain types of masculinity that deserve a bad rap, but throwing out the baby with the bathwater is hurting society, and it's hurting men. And if you hurt any group of people in society, it's going to hurt society, especially when it's half the population. And last comment, really quick, and I'll stop, is just that it's this kind of started in the probably 60s and 70s with kind of the feminist backlash against the quote unquote patriarchy, and then we've heard of like first wave, second wave, third wave feminism. It's kind of morphed over time, and there has not really been much pushback in society. It's just kind of continued to pay a pace until recently, until again, like the Jordan Petersons and certain Christian pastors, like I know he's very controversial, but Mark Driscoll, he's still big on the role of men in society and family. Started a new church, I think, in Arizona or somewhere a while back. So I think it's important. This is an important discussion because I'm convinced that men are critical in family, in society, in every aspects of life. And there's ways to be a strong masculine man that society needs. Um, and I think it's worth talking about.
And I don't I don't know if all of these movements are totally organic. Not to be a conspiracy theorist, but is there a larger underlying motive behind some of what happens? Something that I saw, I don't remember who said this. I don't know who it was attributed to, but that the whether it was the goal or just the inevitable outcome of feminism is that the government can tax both parents and raise the children themselves.
Yeah, that's a good quote.
Who can argue
Yeah, I
with
think
that?
we kind of alluded to it, John. If I'm not mistaken, on the first episode, we might have alluded to this, like kind of this globalist mindset, kind of bleeds into kind of a Marxist mindset of government controlling as much of society as possible, and there's a large faction of people who believe that, have that mindset, versus the kind of the other extremes, the individualist mindset, which tends to lean conservative or independent or what's the word I'm looking for? Libertarian.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, so to Marx's point, like I think the last, I think it's been going on for quite a while, but it's really concentrated, and I think COVID exposed a lot of this kind of global effort to move societies in a more uh, socialist direction. And one way to do that is to undermine masculinity and that type of leadership, and break down families, which leads to breaking down of families, which allows and facilitates and almost requires some kind of more government control. So I think that's a factor, and I think other countries around the world feed those kind of things. I don't know how they do it, but I think just through money and through social media influence and through certain nonprofits that promote that kind of stuff. I think foreign actors could have a role in who want to who see society that way, see America as a strong, independent, freedom-minded country. They want to take us down a few pegs so that as other countries have more ability to have more of an influence in society. So I think there's something to that.
And any society, any nation is going to get more of the behavior that it incentivizes. And I think you're right. Probably back in the '60s, '70s, the that era in American history with scientific advances and cultural norms and mores changing as far as sexual behavior goes. Um, the message that was being sent to young people, to young women in particular, is that you can do whatever you want with very little consequence, and you don't need a man in your life. The government will happily step into that role and help provide for you if you need it. And so the incentive, or at least the social safety net for loose behavior when it comes to relationships, um, was definitely put in place, and I think an entire generation took advantage of it. And you see that in the homes. No need for a home to stay together if the government can provide exactly what the man used to. And that's not to say that there aren't relationships that are abusive and there aren't good reasons, for people to separate for their safety and the safety of their children. But I think a lot of times it's more of a matter of convenience or immediate regret because not a lot of time or thought was placed into the relationship before it began. And then as soon as children are involved, it becomes even more, more, I don't want to say more complicated, but the ramifications of separation become greater. And we'll talk about that in a second too when we get into the second question of what these observable impacts are. And I think we've established that for sure the phenomenon is a thing. Men have been marginalized, whether intentionally or inadvertently, and it seems that it was intentional. Motivations behind it maybe in question. Can't really ascribe a motivation or even a main causal driver of it, like who started this and why. From a Christian perspective, we would obviously say that the family is important to God. He instituted it, and therefore the devil hates it. And it's the forces of evil that have attacked this foundation, this bedrock, this fundamental underlying cornerstone of society, which is the home and the family. But I'll stop there before we move on to the second question here, unless you gentlemen have anything else to add.
I will maybe take a little direction here. I hope I can point all this in a direction. Thoughts are definitely spinning on this. This is something I think about a lot. And, we've mentioned a couple of times the Christian perspective that we have, which I'll just say is the truth. I know we are just human and we're trying to figure out the whole big picture of the truth, but it's been in my mind for a long time that whether you're a Christian or not, you can look at ancient and current religions or philosophies throughout human history, and they all agree that there is, like the yin yang, there's a balance, there's dark and there's light. You have to have two parts come together to make the whole. So we need men to be men and women to be women for there to be a balance. And so this is not just a churchy Christian pillar that we're holding on to for the sake of tradition. We're not just trying to browbeat women into submission because the preacher said we're supposed to do it. This is a very natural thing. This is, people say now trust the science. I mean, this is as scientifically proven as you can get. You got to have good ground for a seed to be planted in, for there to be fruit. This is a threat to all of humankind because of the glaringly obvious truth that we're out of balance. We have way gotten off kilter as far as the role of men and women. And I guess maybe I keep harping in my own mind on how would I talk to somebody about this issue that was not going to sit on a church pew this Sunday, but somebody I can just reach out and connect with in that way. And I know, Marcus, you said something about not wanting to sound like a conspiracy theorist. I think I'm in the deep end on that. I think I'm just a conspiracy theorist now. I can't deny it. It seems like everything comes out of my mouth. I'm like, I never really thought I'd say that out loud, but here we are.
They say the only difference between conspiracy and reality is about 6 weeks.
That's right. Lately, especially.
Yeah.
I want to add a couple things. I want to make something clear. I think we all want to believe this, but I want to say it since we have a growing audience. None of us are saying that that men need we need to reintroduce men and masculinity into society, into families, not at the expense of women at all.
Correct.
The whole point is we're supposed to be working together by design. From a biblical standpoint, of course, we believe that. Even if you just believe in evolutionary standpoint, we evolved together to have societies throughout history, and there's always been families. There's always been father and a mother, and no mother and no father is perfect. And there have been negative trends in both directions and with both genders throughout throughout history. So yeah, it's not like at the expense of anybody. We're just saying that men need to be reintroduced as a healthy component in families and societies. I want to add just a few statistics here really quick that I did look up ahead of time. Maybe I'll incorporate more later, but just to kind of reinforce the point. These are just sociological studies. One is 1991, Amato and Keith, Parental Divorce and the Well-Being of Children, a meta-analysis. Statistic, children with consistent biological father involvement exhibit 30% lower rates of depression, 30%, and anxiety by adolescents compared to those in father-absent households. This meta-analysis of 92 different studies combined together found that regular interaction with a biological father, such as shared activities, emotional support, fosters emotional resilience, reducing internalizing disorders by 25 to 35% into young adulthood. So again, that's a meta-analysis of 92 studies, not just one study. Another one. Arcadi, Christensen, Oberklade, and a bunch of other names, 2008. Father's involvement in children developmental outcomes, a systematic review says that children with engaged biological fathers are 43% less likely to exhibit behavioral problems, aggression, rule breaking by age 10 compared to children with absent fathers. This systematic review of 24 longitudinal studies found that biological fathers' active participation promotes self-regulation, reducing externalizing behaviors in children across different socioeconomic backgrounds, relegated to any kind of race or culture or country, across different backgrounds. And then one more, U.S. Census Bureau 2019, fairly recent, children living arrangements of children under 18 years old. 65% of children in father-absent homes are at risk of substance abuse by age 18, compared to 20% of children living with biological parents. 65% compared to 20%. The data links father absence to a 3.25-fold increase in substance use disorders, with biological father's presence acting as a protective factor through role modeling and supervision. So the stats, and I can read, there's like 30 more I found that prove the role of men's life. Now, what we don't talk about in society is why that is. And that's what's been frustrating for me is, okay, it's obvious, the statistics bear it out, that the father in the home is better for the children, which should matter to, of course, it matters to moms and it should matter to everybody. A lot of those stats are not talked about in regular media, by the way. But what I don't hear about, and we can get into this after Marcus gets into the second part of the question, is why? What is it about men and the presence of men is good? Because there are many aspects of masculinity in men that clearly is good, or those statistics wouldn't bear that out. And I've been frustrated a little bit even seeing people like Mark Driscoll and I think Jordan Peterson, he's the only one that I've really seen that kind of tries to explain what factors of malehood and masculinity are good that lead to these results. But I'll stop there. But that's just something that would be good to tease out.
Yeah, it's a great segue into the next topic of discussion. But before we move on, I want to do something you said reminded me. John, you had mentioned the need for this balance, the yin and the yang. Of course, all of nature exists in a balance, in an equilibrium. And Jim, you had mentioned, the fact that no one, at least no one in their right mind, is advocating male dominance or female dominance. They are complementary to each other. That's actually the way they were created, the reason that they were created. The first 3 chapters of Genesis, again, I know not everybody who will watch this is a Christian, but those of us on this podcast, we share a faith, and it's central to the way we view the world. And I think it makes a compelling case. And so I hope even those who aren't Christians, don't subscribe to Christianity, will at least consider, what we're talking about here. First 3 chapters of Genesis talks about the creation of the world and the creation of man. And it's interesting, if you're familiar with the story of creation, the 6 days of creation, at the end of every day, when God looks at what he has created, the Bible says he looked at it and he said it was good.
Yeah.
Then he gets to the last day of creation, his crowning achievement, which is the creation of man. He creates Adam, and he looks at him and he says, this is not good. The only time in the whole story of creation where he made something and said it's not good. And he recognized that it's not good because it's not complete, because he's alone. Everything else on earth has a counterbalance. All of the animals, Adam's the only one who's alone. And he says that's not good. And his solution to that was to create the woman. After he creates the woman, God looks at it and says, not only is it good, it is now very good. The only time in creation he said that. So the only difference between not good and very good is the creation of a woman. And so the role that a woman plays is incredibly important, cannot be overstated. And it's a balance and a complementary addition to the man. And the reason she was created, God created her to be a help meet for the man. A lot of times, even in Christian circles, when they reference that, they push those 2 words together, and she's a helpmeet. But it's 2 words. It's a help meet, meaning she's a helper that is fit and created for that purpose. And the word help there is not a lesser term, doesn't put her in a lesser role. The word help, as it's translated there, is the same word that refers to a physician, and also has a context of providing something for a man that he is incapable of providing for himself. So without a woman, you could make the argument that God viewed men as helpless. And he created this complementary individual for them to help them in ways that they are completely helpless to assist themselves. And not only that, the same word that is used to describe a woman as a helper, God uses to describe himself all throughout Scripture. And so, for all of those reasons, I don't want any of our lady friends to think that we are somehow saying that they're not important and that they should be subjected and submissive, to the men in their lives. It's a complementary role that we play for each other. But the men are important as well. And the pendulum has swung. You could probably make a decent argument in history that many societies have been very male dominated at the expense of the woman. And that's not good either. But the pendulum has swung so far in the other direction that not only does the man not have an equal role in many cases, he has no role at all.
Yep.
Is the way it's viewed. And the societal impacts, which we're getting ready to talk about, Jim already alluded to, have been significant. And so, interestingly, there was an article published in Politico, and they were talking, this was back in June of 2008, and they were reporting on the recent speech that then Senator Barack Obama had given Father's Day. He was speaking at the Apostolic Church of God in Chicago. And some of the things he said, incredibly interesting with regard to this conversation. Then Senator Obama had this to say. He said, of all the rocks upon which we build our lives, we are reminded today that family is the most important, and we are called to recognize and honor how critical every father is to that foundation. They are teachers and coaches. They are mentors and role models. They are examples of success in the men who constantly push us toward it. But he said, if we're honest with ourselves, we'll admit that too many fathers also are missing from too many lives and too many homes. They have abandoned their responsibilities, acting like boys instead of men. And the foundations of our families are weaker because of it. You and I know how true this is in the African American community. We know that more than half of all black children live in a single parent household, a number that has doubled since we were children. We know the statistics that children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of schools, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. They are more likely to have behavioral problems or run away from home or become teenage parents themselves, and the foundations of our community are weaker because of it. So Jim had already mentioned some of those. Those are the ramifications of a marginalized role of men and fathers, according to President Obama. What are your thoughts?
Those are really powerful points. I was just going to quickly mention that while we're segueing, a thought that was coming to my mind was that this seems to have really all culminated in maybe the 1960s, where women were made to feel like victims for being women, and somebody used that as leverage to get to the point where we are now. I think that's pretty easy to say, but I would also maybe wonder if we shouldn't be careful as men not to make ourselves victims as well. So, like what we're talking about today, we need to find an honorable solution to this and not just say, they started it, or something childish such as that. We as men are not victims no more than the women are victims, I guess. So that was just a thought on my mind. Hopefully that kind of feeds into the segue for our point here in this conversation.
Yeah, I'll say that I think society does have an impact, or sorry, societal messages has an impact, so that if so, I do believe a lot of men. So I'm kind of defending a little bit, John, your last comment just a little bit. That a lot of men, if they're raised in a society or in a school system that promotes kind of this toxic explanation of the role of manhood in family and in society, and our young boys and women grow up believing that, it does change the way they think throughout the rest of their lives. And I don't know how to solve that other than having conversations like we're having right now to get it out into the ether so people to listen to it. And more conversations like this are starting to happen because, like all these statistics that I read and Marcus read, that proves that men have an important role in family and society. But if men don't know that, if boys aren't raised to think that way, and if women aren't raised to believe that men have that important role, then they'll continue to grow up believing a lie and believing that men, they'll be attracted to each other physically, and then after that, if they get married and after that attraction is no longer the main part of their life, then they divert back to the kind of like societal mindset of like, well, I'm a guy. I'm not that important in my child's life, or I'm not that important in my family. And a woman could think the same thing. And I think it contributes to more to divorces, in my opinion, for at the fault of both potentially. I mean, every situation is different, of course, but the man withdrawing because he thinks, well, I don't have much purpose in this family anyway, because that's the message he's hearing in society throughout his life, and the woman discarding the man because she also doesn't believe he has much role in rearing the child or whatever. So we've got to. That's kind of like it's a hard solution, but that's a part of the solution is having hard conversations like this, trying to explain the positive role of men in society, in families, enough that it breaks through the negative narrative so that more boys hear it and believe it, and women hear it and believe it. that, wait a minute, the way our society's been the last 20, 30, 40 years hasn't been great with this, how we've, and I think, John, to your point, or Marcus, I forget who said it, the feminist movement in the 60s started as kind of a backlash to some toxic masculinity. And there is, again, I've said it 3 or 4 times now, there is toxic masculinity, and there's also toxic femininity. People are broken. But we're created, men and women, with strengths and weaknesses to complement each other. And that's the message that we've got to get out to more boys, and to change the mindset in society, so that, because if people in families don't believe their worth and their value in that family, then it's set up for potential failure right off the bat.
Those are both points really well taken. I think to John's point, if we anybody that views themselves as a victim, you can't view yourself as a victim without also having identified the person or thing that victimized you.
Yep.
And it's a natural tendency to hate your abuser, and therefore to lash out, try to get back, try to get the better of your abuser. And I think in a large degree that defines feminism in a lot of ways. They viewed the men, they viewed the male patriarchy, as they call it, as the source of their victimhood, and they've made an entire movement out of lashing out and trying to get back at the men. To the extent that men have been marginalized, I agree with John. It would be very unproductive for men to take a victim mentality and retaliate the way the feminists did. That just keeps the pendulum swinging, in the other direction, and it doesn't get to an honorable solution, as John said. So, what is the honorable solution? I would offer. I have a little bit of personal experience that I'll share with you, gentlemen, in this regard. Thankfully, it was limited. Being in the military, deploying, and Jim, you can probably relate to this. We basically extract ourselves, almost delete ourselves from our family's life for months and months at a time. A typical deployment in the Marine Corps is 6 to 8 months, maybe 9 on the outside, and then on the front side of that, you've got about 3 months of workups. And so, in a year of deployment, you can just count on it that you're going to be almost completely absent for about 9 months from your family's life. And of course, you leave your spouse to deal with everything. Now they have to be both mother and father. They're responsible for the bills. They're responsible for anything that breaks. They're responsible for any of the relationship issues that happen, between kids at school and teachers and all of this. It's a big responsibility to just dump on a spouse while we go play Army, And my wife is incredible. Every time that I asked her to do that over the last 20 years, she stepped up and did an amazing job. She is the epitome, I think, of what you would call a strong and independent woman. And the first two or three times I deployed, when I came back, it was very difficult for me to reinsert myself into my family's life because they had been existing completely without me for 9 months. I was literally not necessary. And I mentioned that to my wife on a couple of occasions. I feel like a ghost in my own life. Quite literally, the first time I deployed, we were renting a house at the time in Jacksonville, North Carolina, right off of Western Boulevard. Forget the name of the street. South Club, I think is the name of the street. Anyway, we were renting. And while I was deployed, an unscrupulous real estate agent kind of tried to strong arm my wife and tell her, hey, the house that you're renting, people that own it want to sell it. So you either have to buy it or you have to get out. Of course, that was very unethical. A lot of problems with that. She called me. I was in Kuwait at the time, and I wasn't in a position to really do anything about this. I said, babe, just go buy a house. tell him to pound sand, and just go buy one. And so she did. She literally bought a house by herself while I was gone. So when I came home after the big homecoming celebration and everything, it's time to leave the squadron and go home. We went to the car and she handed me the keys, and I said, I don't know where we live. You're going to have to drive. So she drove us home. She had to show me my bedroom. She had to tell me where the bathroom was. We had a new address. We had a new phone number. So literally for like the next month or two, when we would go out, and I would try to be like, I'm the man of the house. I'm going to go get the oil changed in the car, right? Step up to the counter and like, sir, do you have an account with this? I'm like, do we have an account? Yes, we have an account. Okay, I'll look you up in the computer. What's your address? What's our address? Do you have a phone number? Pretty sure we do, but I don't know it. So I knew nothing about our life, and so like I was in no position to be the man of the house, right? And so my wife very graciously, slowly allowed me back into the leadership role. And so I tell that story, and we had to have some long conversations about it because like it really messed with me coming back and realizing that I'm not really necessary in my own family. To the extent that I am the leader, it's because they allow me to be, right? And that was a humbling thing for me, but it was good for me too. And I think that's probably the case in a lot of families. Women are not weak. It may actually even be true that they don't need the man. And you could probably make the same argument for a man. May not need the woman in that aspect. But we each have a role to play in the other's life. There is a biblical and a spiritual need. And my wife, as capable as she is, she allows me to be the leader. And as the man, I need that, right? And so I think when women realize that by allowing the men in their life to lead their home, they're allowing that man to fulfill God's plan for him. It has nothing to do with whether or not the woman is capable of doing it on her own. She is. But the man needs to fulfill that role in order to feel like he has fulfilled what God has called him to do. And when women refuse to let a man do that, it causes problems, I think, mentally and emotionally and spiritually for the man. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling.
No, dude, I think that was beautiful, and I agree with you 100%. That's very well put.
Hey, Marcus, I will say, I was going to say, as a small business owner in Jacksonville, North Carolina, where you guys were living, we see military dads come home all the time, and we know what we're looking at when the guy walks through the door for the first time. We're like, you have no idea what to do here, do you? So we give him the benefit of the doubt. He'll catch up eventually. But I mean, I guess more on a serious note, I have learned to look at these guys as some of them you can tell they're just coming back to you call this normal life or whatever. And yeah, it does make a difference in how we look at people's family lives and family situations. So I don't know if that really factors into this conversation, but I just thought that was an interesting both sides of that situation.
100%
Your situation and on my side of things as a civilian serving the military. Yeah, so I just thought I'd throw that in there if that makes you feel any better.
It makes me think there's two good movies for any military folks out there that deploy and come back to families and experience what Marcus described really well. Really good movies that illustrate this are Hurt Locker. Have you seen Hurt Locker, Marcus? At the end of that movie, have you seen that, John?
I have.
So you have. So he's the whole movie. This guy's a hero. He's a bomb technician defusing bombs. The whole movie. He's just like the go-to guy. Comes home at the end. Wife has a new baby. She sends him out to go grocery shopping, and he's completely clueless. Not only is he clueless, he's overwhelmed at the number of choices. He's standing in front of the cereal aisle, and he's just looking at thousands of boxes of cereal and can't, like, his mind just kind of shuts down. Because in hindsight, it was very simple in Iraq, very dangerous, but very simple, and he had a purpose. And then another movie is American Sniper, about Chris Kyle. Another example of this one's a Navy SEAL deploying a lot, a hero, comes back home and struggles to reunite with his wife and eventually his baby. Both movies illustrate it very well, and to me it made me think of the point in Marcus, your example of the your wife helping you back into that leadership role, because a lot of what we're talking about is, and why anybody kind of, I think, unravels and turns to drug addiction, drug use, or alcohol use, or other means to, I don't know, to escape their problems, is because people need to know that they're meaningful. Their life has purpose.
Yeah.
Marcus, you'd explained it, beautifully, how husband and wife should support each other in their purpose, not just in the home, but in, if they each have a career or a job or whatever it is. We need to know that our people important to us value what we're doing and value our role in the family, outside the family, in the military, or in whatever job we're doing. And that's where things start going haywire. If someone thinks that somebody, because of toxic terms like patriarchy or whatever, they're not valuable, or they're not really suitable for this role, or if a woman is demeaned because they're a woman or whatever, that attacks their sense of purpose. And I think that's where things really start to unravel in society and at the individual level. Because that's ultimately what I think every single person wants to know that they're here on Earth for a purpose, and making a difference in some way, shape, or form. And if they don't feel that way, if they're not supported that way, they're going to go find some way to, deaden the pain that grows inside them, and that's when things start going south, in my opinion.
Yeah. And at a very primal level, whether we acknowledge God's design or not, at a very primal level, men and women both have an instinct of what their role and purpose is.
Mm-hmm.
Our bodies are built for it, our minds are wired for it, and anytime we are obstructed or impeded from fulfilling that role, there are manifestations of it, mentally, emotionally, physically, um, and again, as I said before, my wife, I use the word allowing, permitting me to be the leader of our family, not necessarily because she needs it, but because she knows I need it, and it shouldn't be out of a place of ego, but it's out of an innate and primal desire to do what God has built and designed and called me to do. The same for her. And so anytime I hear women talk about, the whole thing that the Bible talks about submitting, it's not a forced submission. It's not something that they are physically intimidated into doing. It shouldn't be. Um, Assuming that it wasn't an arranged marriage and no one put a gun to anybody's head to say I do, it's an arrangement that we agree to from the beginning. Um, Not as one dominating over the other, but understanding the way God has designed the home, what He's called each of us to do. And we do so lovingly in support of the other, as we read in Ephesians chapter 6, preferring one over the other, preferring each other over ourselves. And I think that is, as we've talked about before, it's not that there's anything wrong with God's design. God's design is perfect, but the way we abuse it and misuse it is what causes all of the trouble. John, I think I cut you off. You look like you started to say something. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just agreeing with your direction there. I hear a lot of good food for thought there.
And so the ramifications of not having that arrangement. Fathers being absent from the home. I mentioned what President Obama had mentioned in his Father's Day speech. Jim read some really good statistics to us as well. And there's another study that was done by the Institute for Family Studies. Actually, the Institute for Family Studies just referenced it. The National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health. Teenage pregnancy among adolescent girls. Girls are less likely to end up pregnant as teens if they're raised in an intact home with both of their biological parents, rather than a home headed by a single mother. Likewise, boys who grow up in an intact home headed by their biological parents are less likely to end up delinquent than their peers growing up in a home without a father. Men and women are significantly more likely to graduate from college if they come from an intact biological family. And so the conclusion at the end of this article by the Institute for Family Studies is that if the nation is committed to boosting the fortunes of children, bridging the racial divide in child well-being, it is our considered conclusion as family scholars that we need to strengthen marriage and fatherhood in the community. And so Jim had mentioned this before. We may not even understand why having a man in the home has the effect that it does. But the statistics in the study, the research supports that there is a positive influence that a man and a father brings to the family and therefore to society, because the family is the building block, the fundamental building block of society. And so while we might not be able to explain why men have that kind of positive impact when they're in that role and doing it God's way, I think as Christians we would concede that it works because that's the way God designed it. And you're now using the family and the components of the family in the way that God intended. And that's always best.
So why do you think? That's the part I wish we're not going to solve in this podcast, but I think that's the direction that this discussion, generally speaking, across society is starting to happen more often, needs to go. I think people, men, boys, need to hear what about how they're made does make them and those characteristics important to society, important to families. So to put us all on the spot here, why? Like, what is it about healthy masculinity in men, in our character and our nature? What are some good things about that, do you think?
Did you lose John?
Did I mute John? Let's see.
No, I don't.
Oh.
I don't see him.
Oh, lost him. I think we just lost him.
Oh, hopefully you can rejoin
Yeah.
us. I think though, everybody I think is familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Are you familiar with that, Jim?
Yeah.
So if I recall correctly, on that pyramid at the very bottom is security. Safety before everything else. None of that other stuff matters if you're not safe, you don't feel secure. And I think that is the main thing that men provide, or that they're supposed to. Biologically, they're made for it. And it's something that women, while they are not totally incapable of providing for themselves, they are not as adept at it as men are. Men are made for violence. If you listen to Jordan Peterson, if you listen to some of these other folks, they'll go into the psychology and everything behind that way in a much more articulate way than I can do here. But that's the way men are. That's the way we're wired. And it's a good thing if it's contained. Jordan Peterson is famous for saying that, if you think strong men are dangerous, wait until you see what weak men are capable of.
Yeah. That's a great line.
Strength under control that provides a sense of safety and security for a family, so that they feel that they can pursue all of these other things that are important to families. Without that security, you're always left a little unguarded, a little on edge, a little unsure, a little uncertain. And so if nothing else, I think men provide that. And maybe that's the underpinning of why everything else seems to go better when there's a man in the house. And again, women are capable of defending themselves too, but I think as the recent controversy over men and women's sports has made abundantly clear, pound for pound and toe to toe, that they won't fare well. And the Marine Corps, did that study as well when they tried to form an entire platoon out of females and put them against a male platoon. So I think we see it everywhere we go. And I think regardless of what people might try to advocate for politically, deep down they understand that to be an inherent truth.
Yeah. I think you mentioned earlier that women are strong in their own way, and they definitely are by nature. And again, I'm generalizing here. And emotionally, like, and oftentimes women get a bad rap for being emotional, and women are more emotional than men, but that's our nature, and that's a good thing. And I think it allows, and women tend to be more social, and they tend to have better social networks to help them through hard times, with their other female friends. Men are stereotypically more stoic and less social, and more prone to, this is a critique of men, but I'm thinking this on the fly here. It's also, I think, a strength. So, men are known to kind of keep their emotions to themselves, and also can carry the burden of other people's emotions. So I think men can bring that sense of stability to a family, and again, if a man is involved and believes that they have a role and a purpose in their family's life, and they're present, and they really believe that, one of the things I think that a man can bring is just being able to take on the emotional challenges that their spouse and their children may be going through, and carry that burden in a way, just different than how a woman does, if that makes sense. And just have that stability and that strength, and men and women, again, this gets to the point of, like, it's not that men and women are complementary. They bring different approaches to the same thing, and each approach is equally good. But a man will think about a problem differently than a woman will. If the child's having a problem at school, or with a girlfriend or boyfriend, or whatever, bringing those different approaches together, how the man, again, stereotypically thinks, and the woman would stereotypically think about it, I think is healthy. And you take away either one of those perspectives, and now you have a potentially out of balance way to look at something. And I think that's another factor to what men bring to the table, is just kind of that emotional stability, and not stability, emotional kind of consistency, I guess, and predictability allows for a man to take on other people's burdens. So again, that's a factor, I think, a tangible factor that I think brings stability to a family potentially. And again, I just want to caveat, I hope no one's hearing me say anything negative about how a woman handles things. Women are incredibly resilient, and they do express their emotions more than men, and that's not bad at all. It's just that men then react to things differently. So I think that's how they're complementary, and bring stability to a family as well.
I think that's really good. And I'd read something about that in the past, and I don't remember where I read this, but essentially the conclusion that they came to, because of exactly what you were just talking about, they said that men are kind of more suited to a family's foreign policy, how you interact with other families in the world around you, whereas women seem to be more suited toward domestic policy in terms of how the internal workings of the family go. I don't know about your wife, but I know my wife. She is ready to go to war anytime somebody says, you know, a crossword about one of our kids or me. She's extremely defensive and like violently loyal, right? And which I love and I appreciate it. But if that were turned loose, you know, in our foreign policy, we might not have very many friends, you know? Um, so it's that balance that John was talking about, the yin and the yang. Um, you know, and sometimes I'm like, all right, babe, I like your approach. Let's go with that. This person needs to be scorched. But you know, sometimes I'm like, okay, I understand what you're saying, but you know, in the interest of preserving relationships, maybe we can go about this a little bit different way. Um, there's something else I was going to say. Oh, as the head of a home, a man is not, as you said, we're not perfect. So inevitably, we're going to make wrong choices from time to time. More often than I would like to admit, I've made the wrong choice and maybe led my family in a direction that had to be reversed. But my wife, to her credit, she's been phenomenal every time. And as as the head of the home, I may steer the ship direction that we later regret, but she's never thrown that in my face. She's never said I told you so. She's never, you know, tried to undercut me because of a decision that I made or somehow, you know, drag me through the mud because of it. And it reminded me, again, going back to that term help that the Bible uses to describe a woman help that is fit, complementary to a man. There's a story of the shipwreck in Acts chapter 27 where Paul is famously shipwrecked. And as the sailors in charge of that ship are trying to hold this ship together, they've already bailed out. They bailed the water. They've thrown cargo overboard, and the storm is literally ripping this ship apart. And if you read the King James version of that story, it says that in order to hold the ship together, the sailors passed metal cables underneath the ship and basically tied the bulkheads together with these metal cables. The word that is used in King James to describe those cables, they say they passed helps under the ship. This thing that was designed to hold the ship together in the middle of a storm that's trying to tear it apart. And it's interesting that a wife is described with the same word, help, as God is described with the same word, help. And so as men, sometimes we drive the ship into the middle of a storm, and it's only the support of our wives and through the help of God that keeps the ship from being torn completely apart. And that, I think, is the way that we support each other. Wives, incredibly important to that. And without it, I think men are destined to fail.
Yeah, that's really good. Excellent analogy and excellent actual, biblical words and their actual meanings, which brings us much more light to the whole concept of men and women in God's eyes. I was just reading another example of this is something that Jordan Peterson says as far as what men practically bring to a family that's positive. Again, a lot of these things are society skews as negatives, but it's actually positive. There's an example. Often bring distinct parenting styles, such as encouraging risk taking, physical play, and boundary setting, which complement maternal approaches. Healthy masculinity allows men to express nurturing while maintaining firmness, creating balanced child rearing environments. It's another example of men's styles and women's styles working together. Um, anyway, when men often have again back to this sense of meaning and purpose. A lot of men want to lead large organizations and things like that, larger causes. Women definitely do that as well, but typically it seems that um, more women are I will say this, like you mentioned when you came back from your deployment, and you were clueless and how your family was operating. And yeah, the obvious reason for that is because your wife was running the family when you were gone. Um, and I experienced, and I haven't deployed in a long time, but like I experienced that in my own home on a regular basis because, I'll be working and my wife will go shopping, come back, and she has in her mind, she's an incredible, like her vision of how the house should be is something that I completely lack. And I don't know if that's a woman thing, man thing, whatever, but it's in our marriage. She has a vision for how our house should be organized and set up and to be efficient and clean. If it was just me, it would be a mess. So she has in her mind where things go, where the groceries go, where the dishes go, where the plates go, where the pots go. And I drive her crazy on occasion because I have to ask her over and over again, hey, where'd you put the box or whatever, or where's this plate again? But she doesn't understand why I never learn. And there's some funny skits out there again, stereotypically making fun of men in families, sitcom examples all over the place, and some of that is some truth to it. I can't think of the guy's name. Oh, man, it's a really funny skit. I wish I could think of it. Sitcom where he asks where the scissors is. Oh man, I shouldn't even bring it up because I can't think of it. He's a comedian, and Family Guy, not Family Guy. Anyway, I'll cut this out, probably the podcast because I can't think of it. But it's just asks where the scissors is, and she loses her mind because he asks over and all the time, and she just lost it on him. It's a really funny skit. Anyway, so again, I don't want to over stereotype or stereotype in general, but that is those stereotypes become comedy skits because they are common. Otherwise, it wouldn't be funny, And so I think that men's focus is in different areas of life, generally speaking, and women's is different. And again, they complement each other. But like my wife and a lot of other women I know are really good with the home, and organizing the home and managing the home. And so it's not just because you were on deployment. It's not just because those movies I talked about, American Sniper and Hurt Locker, that they come back and they just can't blend in. It's also part of the nature. It's part of, the focus is different. And what floats your boat, so to speak, is different for men and women. Generally speaking, there's exceptions across the board all the time in all these examples. But again, it just comes back to me, we're complementary. We're meant to be complementary. And I really love that you brought up we're meant to be supportive of each other, knowing that we have weaknesses and we think of things differently. And if we actively think about supporting each other, that leads to such an incredible home life for the kids if there's kids in the home. But even if not, whether it's an empty nest or you never have kids, just it leads to a much more enriching life because God created us differently, created every single person differently, first of all. So it's a good perspective to have with everybody, that everyone thinks a little bit differently, and to be gracious and patient, but especially with your spouse. And if you do that, not only will you avoid arguments, but you'll also have a much more fulfilling home, and each of you will be more effective in your roles of life in society.
Yeah, no, that's all really good. And it was reminding me, Ephesians chapter 5 is kind of the textbook for how God designed the family and how it's supposed to work. And it's interesting, his instructions, the instructions that he gives are designed, the instructions he gives to the man are designed to meet what he knows the needs of the woman to be. The instruction he gives to the woman is specifically designed to meet what he knows the needs of the man to be. There was a study done some years ago. I wish I could remember the name of the couple who did it. Felder obviously didn't bring this prepared, but essentially they asked a question. They were really trying to figure out what makes men and women tick. And so the question that they asked both men and women, if you had to choose and you could only have one, would you rather be loved or respected? And it's probably no surprise to anybody Vast majority, mid to high 90s, I think, of men said they would rather be respected than loved. And the vast majority of women said that they would rather be loved than respected. And of course, in Ephesians chapter 5, men are told to love their wives. It's what women want, it's what they need. And wives are told to respect their husbands.
Yep.
Which is exactly what men need. Ephesians chapter 5 ends out, verse 33, after this whole discussion of the role of men and women in marriage. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband.
Yep.
So God's commands to each are specifically designed to meet the needs of the other. And when a man tries to lord it over his wife, that she's supposed to be in submission to him, that's not love. He's not giving her what she needs, and he's not going to get from her what he needs if it's done in that way.
Yeah. I want to add to that because I had pulled that up also to talk about it briefly. This is another passage that a lot of pastors are afraid to bring up in church because, again, because the society we're in right now, if you start with verse 22, Ephesians 5, verse 22, right away you get into controversy in today's society. But before I go to verse 22, if you start with verse 25, and which you kind of already did when you explained it, start with husbands love your wives. So just before I start, if you're a woman or wife, and you struggle with the idea of submitting to your husband or respecting your husband, if your husband was this way, what would your perspective be? If your husband loved your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to sanctify her, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a glorious church without stain or wrinkle or any such blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. And it goes on. If men lived up to that standard, I think there'd be no controversy at all about, starting with verse 22, wives submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body. Unfortunately, those passages 22 and 23 are controversial in today's society. And again, to me, it points out that we're not perfect, and men often don't live up to those verses 25 through 30. But this is the model that we're supposed to strive towards. We're supposed to strive towards that sacrificial love that would make respecting the husband in the home automatic. Like, who wouldn't respect a man who lived up to that? That love their wives as their own bodies, sacrifice yourself for your wife. That would evoke respect from anybody. Yeah. Anyway, it's just the Bible has so much to, and you pointed it out, like that non-religious study that you pointed out about the love and respect. It's right there in the Bible, verse 33. It says it right there. We do have natures. We do have proclivities towards needing certain things, love, respect, etc. And we've just got to not throw out the difficult parts of the Bible, but strive to live up to them. And again, there's so much more of the Bible that alludes to what you and I have been talking about, and John has been talking about supporting each other, lifting each other up, encouraging each other, edifying each other. If we do that, well, both the husband and the wife will be fulfilled. The children will be nourished. The children will be supported. But again, it's easy to say, but it is hard to do. We just have to keep striving for it and support each other, and just don't listen to the lies of what the world feeds us. Believe in that God made all of us for a purpose. He made us to love, to support each other, and we just have to keep striving for that.
Yeah, the like you said, a lot of times people will zero in on verse 22 of Ephesians chapter 5. Wives, submit yourselves to your husband. And immediately, as soon as the reference is given, the entire congregation goes,
Yeah.
it's getting ready to get real, you know. But the verse preceding that, I think we should always start with verse 21. It says, submitting yourselves one to another,
There you
the
go.
wife and the husband,
There you
right?
go.
So loving my wife is submitting, putting my desire second place to hers,
That's great.
uh, and vice versa, right? Um, when both of us have as our primary goal the best for the other, we're both better off. And so while I am supposed to be the head of the home, I don't make decisions without consulting my wife. I want it to be a collaborative effort. Ultimately, I'm the one that has to answer to God for whatever our family does or doesn't do. But I am commanded to submit myself to my wife, just like she's commanded to submit herself to me. And if we're submitting to each other, then neither of us are being oppressed, right?
Yep.
And the role that the man has to play, that he's been directed to play as the leader. And I was thinking about this just the other day because I started to think about the order in which things happened in Genesis. And after Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, after Eve ate the fruit, and it says God came down to walk with them in the cool of the day in the garden as was his habit. He did that often. But now Adam and Eve were hiding because they knew they had done something wrong. As God was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, getting ready to confront them for their sin, it says he called out, Adam, where are you? Interesting, he didn't say, Adam and Eve, where are y'all? He wasn't looking for Eve. He was looking for Adam.
Yeah.
Adam was the one who was going to be called to the mat to answer for what he and Eve had both done. And I started thinking, because if we read in chapter 2, when Satan was tempting Eve, and they were having this discussion about what God did or didn't say, did God really say if you do this, you're going to die? And Eve said, well, he did say that if we can't eat of this fruit, and if we even if we touch it, we're going to die, which God didn't say that, right? But either way, it got me to thinking, should Eve have known better? And if you go back in chapter 2, I can't find a record where God ever told Eve this instruction.
Interesting.
He told Adam not to eat of that tree before Eve was even created.
That's
And
interesting.
so it got me to thinking, whatever Eve knew or didn't know about this rule, she must have learned from Adam.
Yeah.
And maybe Adam did a poor job of articulating the law.
Yep.
But either way, Adam was the one who was held responsible.
Yep.
So it
And
really convicted. Go ahead.
yeah, no, and Adam, as far as we can tell, when Eve was tempted, Adam was standing right there next to her. As far as we could tell, the way it's written in the Bible, he was standing right there and let that conversation happen between her and the serpent, because then she offered the apple to Adam after she got it from the serpent. So now, and the example you brought up, I hadn't heard of. That's a really good point. Adam was supposed to explain to Eve what God told Adam, and maybe that didn't happen. And you could assume it didn't happen based on what Eve did. But even when it happened, Adam was right there, and he could have said, you serpent, stop right there. Hold on, time out. He didn't do it. So he failed. At least once, if not twice, if not more times, as being the leader of that family.
Yeah, and as I was thinking on that and studying, it really convicted my heart as the leader of my home to be more careful in what I say and what I believe to be God's will for my family, for my kids. Because if I get that wrong, these are the kinds of problems
Yeah.
that it can cause.
Yeah.
And it's why I don't want to make any of those decisions in a vacuum. I want my wife's input, and she's gracious enough to give it to me, and then also allow me to make the final decision.
Yeah.
But anyway, John wasn't able to get back on, but there was something he was going to add to this portion of the conversation about what we were previously talking about regarding victimhood, the cause of the tension of toxic masculinity, patriarchy, or the victimhood of women. He said it seems to him that these feelings were given fertile ground to grow because for so long now we have been taught to live according to what our feelings tell us. If we allow our feelings to lead us, we often feel like victims because of where we are in life as a man or a woman. But if we're looking at our life as something bigger than that, like, for example, an opportunity to procreate and make new life, our own little feelings are less significant. But isn't that the place where sin itself began?
It's very well put.
Yeah. A lack of contentment with where we are in life.
Yeah, it's very well put.
Yeah. I wish you could have gotten back on to discuss that. But so we talked about the negative impacts for a father not being present. As we wrap it up, I would like to mention some interesting statistics on what happens when a father is present. So again, going back to that sermon that was preached earlier this month out in Cabot, Arkansas, the title of the sermon was Strong Men, Safe Homes. Lifeway Research pulled these statistics together. And this is aimed specifically at church attendance, which of course we know even our founding fathers said that our country, our Constitution is built for a moral people and it's wholly inadequate to govern any other. And if morality matters, where does morality come from? It comes from, you have to have some agreed upon source of your morals. And in America, at least, that has traditionally been the Bible. That's one of the things that's made America great. And as we lose that, our country suffers. And so these statistics are pointed at church attendance, which I would argue is the building block for the morality on which our Constitution and our country depends. The impact on kids of a dad's faith and church attendance. These are statistics from Lifeway. When both parents attend Bible study, in addition to the Sunday services, 72% of their children will attend Sunday school when grown. When only the father attends Sunday school, 55% of the children will attend when grown. When only the mother attends Sunday school, 15% of the children will attend when grown. And when neither parent attends Sunday school, only 6% of the children will attend when they become adults. If a child is the firstborn in the household to become a Christian, there is a 3.5% probability that everyone else in the household will follow. If the mother is the first to become a Christian, there's a 17% chance that everyone else will follow. However, when the father is the first, when the father leads the way, there is a 93% probability that everyone else in the household will follow.
Isn't that amazing?
And so the pastor there, Pastor George, said that these statistics aren't putting women down. They're not putting kids down. It's just acknowledging that somehow, some way in God's design, he has put this onus, this burden of leadership on men. And when men step up to that role and do it God's way, things are good. When they retreat or perform that role poorly or not at all, families, society, and the nation suffer.
Yep. 100%. It's incredible. The stats bear it out overwhelmingly over and over and over and over and over again in multiple ways. So I think we just have to keep having these discussions in our circles. I started to join a couple men's groups where we talk about this kind of stuff and help each other model our roles better and healthier and change the culture, change the mindset. And that is happening across the country, I think, and hopefully across other parts of the world. But our men's role is indisputably important. And if women don't think it, if women are oppressed or don't, their role is mitigated, or men's role is mitigated or ridiculed, it's bad for society, hands down. So we've got to come back together to realize that we're both equally important, and support each other. And your story earlier about how your wife supported you when you came back from the military was just a beautiful story, and I'm gonna play that back because that's how it should be. That's really awesome. And really
And I
quick,
think
one quick caveat: the sitcom I was thinking of is King of Queens.
Jason, what's his name?
Yeah, it's something James something.
Kevin
Kevin James.
James.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just YouTube, Google that. Doug can't find the scissors. It's hysterical. And that's what I experience often in my home. I can't find whatever, and my wife just cannot comprehend how I can't figure out where it is. So, anyway,
Yeah, I think as we wrap this up, the honorable solution that John mentioned before, like obviously we can't as men, we can't force women to change the way they view us. We can't force society to immediately take a different view of men and masculinity. As you mentioned, the only thing we can do is collectively, starting, individually and collectively, exhibit what biblical masculinity looks like and earn that. And Titus chapter 2, I think, is a beautiful layout of how men should behave. And if we behave ourselves in this way, we won't have to force anybody to respect us. We won't have to force anybody to allow us to fulfill our role in society. Titus chapter 2, verse 1. But speak thou the things which become sound doctrine, that the aged men be sober, grave, temperate, sound in faith, in charity, in patience. Then down in verse 6, young men likewise exhort to be sober-minded, in all things showing thyself a pattern of good works, in doctrine showing uncorruptness, gravity, sincerity, sound speech that cannot be condemned, that he that is of the contrary part may be ashamed, having no evil thing to say of you. If we can conform our conduct to that, I think the rest of the problem solves itself.
100%. Great way to end it. Good topic, Marcus. Thanks for bringing it up. It's a tough one to talk about with all the minefields that society puts out there for it, but we've got to talk about this stuff, and I think it's
Yes.
I've learned a lot. Every time I talk to you guys, I learn something from it, and hopefully some other folks will too, listening to this.
Likewise. Yep. Always appreciate y'all's perspective and what you bring to the table.
Thanks, Marcus. God bless. Have a great rest of the week.
God bless you, man.
All right, man.
See you next time.
Okay, cool. See ya.